Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. Recently, Nigeria Hydrological Services Agency noted that 5 states of the country should be on a red alert of imminent flooding. Clement Nze, Director General of NIHSA, who said this at a news conference at NIHSA headquarters in Abuja, listed the states which include Edo, Delta, Rivers, Anambra and Bayelsa. According to him, the floods ravaging parts of Adamawa, Taraba, Benue and Kogi states will likely affect Edo, Delta, Anambra, Rivers and Bayelsa states. Clement Nze said the cause of the current flooding in the northern states is the opening of the Lagdo Dam managed by the Cameroonian government. Joining us now to discuss these issues and more is Dr. Onoja, Director Technical Programs at the Nigerian Conservation Foundation. Good morning. Welcome to the morning show.
Good morning.
Welcome to the morning show.
Thank you, and thank you for having me.
Yes, but please, you need to help us with some clarifications.
Okay.
Now, the Lagdo Dam has been a problem between Nigeria and Cameroon since we had that crisis in 2012. In 2012, more than 20 states of the Federation were affected with a lot of devastation across the country. We were just lucky not to have a food supply crisis in Nigeria. Now, a memorandum of understanding was signed. Now, I think it's shocking that in 2019, we're still hearing about the threat of Lagdo Dam. Now, the Cameroonians said they were going to release water from Lagdo Dam between October 10 and October 31. Why are we just having the alert now from Nigeria Hydrological Services Agency? Because by October 31, the Cameroonians had already closed the Lagdo Dam. So what exactly is happening? And why has Nigeria not done its own part? Because we're supposed to build our own dam. I visited that dam at least about twice, and there was advanced work on it. So at what point did we abandon that project to protect the River Niger and River Benue from overflooding, across its banks?
Well, that's a very interesting question. First of all, let me say that the Nigerian Conservation Foundation, we are a non-governmental organization, and we seek to protect the environment, to work with other stakeholders protecting the environment. And the issue of the flooding, as you rightly pointed out, right from 2012, this is 7 years down the line, we're still talking about the same issue, the same Lagdo Dam releasing water. Except is something that it's surprising to us. It's really, it just goes to tell us how we operate as Nigerians, which is really unfortunate because there are agencies saddled with this responsibility who should have been on top of this. 2-3 years ago, I was asked this same question about Lagdo Dam, and I said that time that if we continue the way we are continuing, 2-3 years down the line, we'll still come back and talk about the same Lagdo Dam, and here we are today. We're still talking about the same Lagdo Dam, as if it's one mystery that we cannot solve on our own part. Cameroonians actually told us that they are going to release water. And in fact, let me even tell you, before that water was released, people are already experiencing flood. I was in Bayelsa State, I was in Rivers State, in some communities were already ravaged. We couldn't visit some communities because they were already ravaged with flood. And that is even to exacerbate the issue by opening of the Lagdo Dam. So I think the right people that will have answered that question directly will have been those the ministry and the agencies directly responsible. What is delaying us? Because we have structures put in place for just complete that dam so that we will stop this devastation of both lives and property. As rightly mentioned, that 2012, we're lucky not to have gotten into a food crisis. It will have been a major disaster, and we're still experiencing that. And if we continue like this, we'll still come back next year and talk about this Lagdo Dam. And these issues continue to exacerbate, especially with climate change, and especially with the way we are treating our environment in Nigeria.
So let's talk about that. It's been established that we'll continue to be vulnerable until that dam is built in the Benue sub-basin. But that's way above our pay grade. It's a government issue. Yeah. What can individuals do at this point? And I also wanted to ask you, what does that red alert mean? What does that actually mean in practical terms, this red alert that's being called in 5 states?
For me, in practical terms, is just saying the obvious. Because we know it's rainy season. Rains are more intense now, and it's going to flood. So it's just like saying the obvious. it's going to flood, it's going to flood. In fact, some of these states, as I said, have already experienced flooding even before this red alert came in. And as Raleigh pointed out, the dam was closed on the 31st of October, but we're just getting the red alert now. So for me, the red alert is coming a bit late. But because this should have come earlier. Now, coming to your question, what can we as individuals do? Because sometimes we relegate our responsibility as individuals to the government. Number one, we don't have proper town planning, and that is why people will be allowed to build on floodplains. They are called floodplains by simple English, floodplains. It means that water will definitely come back there. So I would take my money and the lives of my family and just put it there. Obviously, that water will always find its level. And that's exactly what happens. So as an individual, I will not go and build my house along floodplains. And most of these houses that you find being submerged most of them are along the floodplains. And so there should be an isolation distance where buildings must not go beyond, because they should allow water to always breathe. And that is why we find a lot of this catastrophe happening. That's on one hand. On the other hand, as individuals, you see, sometimes we don't relate what happens with our environment with our actions and inactions. We have so devastated our trees. Let me give you a simple logic. When it rains and there are trees, what it does, it breaks the current and it percolates gradually. And there's uptake from the roots of the trees, uptake of some of the water, it holds the soil, and so the runoff is not as much as it will be. But where there are no trees, everywhere is bare, when it rains, it hits the ground directly, and there's this runoff. So it increases whatever, call it a flash flood, the fluvial flood, whatever flood it is, it increases the runoff. So as individuals, we must be conscious of what we do in our environment. And that is where we as NCF, that's what really matters to us most.
Okay, so let me come in there on this MOU between Nigeria and Cameroon over the Lagdo Reservoir Dam after the 2012 crisis. What exactly did this MOU outline? Because if in 2019, the Nigerian public can hear about a week or two after the dam has been shut that it's been opened again and there was a red alert that we're giving you maybe a month or two late, then clearly the MOU has very little substance. And that is the first problem. How does the MOU ensure that Nigerian citizens are best protected is the first thing that I wanted to go at. And then I also wanted to ask how serious the crisis is right now in the states that have been put on red alert. Is it a case of the crisis has come and gone and it's no longer as serious, or is it still a very serious crisis right now, even though the dam shuts on the 31st of October?
Yeah, well, for the MOU, I may not be able to go into the nitty-gritty of it, but I can tell you that it's to protect at least the downstate, which is Nigeria. We're supposed to protect our people. But to answer the second question, I will tell you that the situation is bad. Even before the red alert came, as I mentioned, when some communities in River State and in Bayelsa State, Taylor Creek, for instance, was already flooded. I stood in somebody's backyard and I could step my feet into the water. And that's even before the red alert came. So people are already being affected. So it's something that is and I can even term it an existential crisis for some of these communities. Because if it continues this way, their livelihood will be washed off. Their farmlands are already be affected. When we discussed with some of the locals, they said some parts of their farmlands, in fact, they were harvesting their cassava before the time. And that is an indication of the fact that the time that is supposed to take them for the cassava to mature, number one, the cassava is not very matured, and then the time that it is supposed to take them for them to use that cassava will be shortened. And that will have a livelihood crisis there.
Yeah, the red alert is with regard to the release of water from the Lagdo Dam.
Yeah.
Now, but beyond that, we also know that there is a challenge of climate change. What has your organization found in terms of how climate change is impacting on Nigeria and may possibly be responsible for the crisis of flooding and even the shift in the seasons that we seem to be witnessing?
Thank you very much. You know, when we talk about climate change, people thought that it's one a concept that is very far away from us. But here in Lagos, we have rains and very strong rains even up to November. Somewhere like central part of Nigeria, a city like Jos, that at September, towards October, it doesn't rain, but in October they witness serious rains. So that is a shift. That is climate change in action. That's a shift in the rain pattern, and it calls for a lot of unpredictability, which makes people not to plan properly, and it even affects especially coastal towns, because you have the flooding coming in, you have the coastal erosion happening, especially in Lagos. Serious coastal erosion is happening. There's rise in the sea level, yes, and it's been predicted that if we witness some meters rise in sea level in Lagos, we may have to redraw the map of Nigeria, because some of the land will be cleared. And we visited some communities along the Lekki beach. When you go there, they will tell you that, oh, there was a well over there. Well, we actually saw a well, and they told us that was the third well in the community, because it's been washed off over time. And it's actually happening. So climate change is real, and that is why we are calling on individuals, corporate organizations. Everybody should put hand on deck to ensure that we fight this in our own little way. And one of the ways that we can do this is we must plant trees. Now we have so much developed, we are beginning to live in concrete jungles. When we build our homes, we have everywhere covered in concrete. I know that there is this law, I don't know how strong it is in Lagos, 25% of every land should be green. But how much of that is being implemented is a serious problem, and we need to take responsibility. So climate change is exactly exacerbating the situation that we find ourselves.
So thank you for that little glimmer of hope, because as long as you can do something, there's a bit of hope there, because climate change, like you said, is an existential crisis.
Yeah.
And Lagos, in fact, the whole of Lagos, it was listed in a report that I read recently of cities that will be submerged by 2050. Cities all over the world. It's not an African problem.
No, it's not a global problem.
It's a global problem. So we can plant trees. What else can we do? Because I see how people are just casual in their disposal of trash.
Exactly.
That's a problem. And we look at these awful footage that we see of people wading waist deep in floodwaters, and all I'm thinking is disease-carrying vectors as well. Let's talk about all of that and how we can all really contribute.
Yes, I was going to that. That was my second point. And it's so bad that sometimes when you are driving behind a Porsche car, you see the glass coming down and then throwing trash out. So you wonder at what point is our education or our enlightenment helping us as a nation? People don't trace their trash. You don't care where your trash ends up. Then it goes and blocks the drainages. Number one, we already have an issue of flooding, and then water doesn't have a passage because the drainages are blocked by indiscriminate disposal of waste. Thank God the Lagos State government has come up with the Blue Box scheme, and I hope that it's sustained in such a way that trash will be properly separated. The ones that will be converted into manure will be converted. The one that will be converted into some other uses will be done, so that we'll have zero trash on our street. We find people all over the world trying to use converting waste to wealth, but we are yet to get there. And we should try together. But we can do our own bits and our own part as individuals, because trash is a problem, especially in our domain. Trash is a problem, and we must ensure that we have proper waste disposal. So in my organization, we try to encourage people to dispose their trash correctly. Single use, we will continue to campaign. Single use plastics should be banned.
Absolutely.
Because they are not biodegradable.
Yes, they are not biodegradable. They should be banned. Single-use plastics. It's been done elsewhere. It can be done. And let's go back to our old ways of doing things. When I'm going to buy things, I can have my shopping bags at home, take it to the grocery, and buy my things and come. And if I don't need it, I don't need to carry it. And we need to change our mentality. There was a day I bought plantain, and my car was just parked beside the road, and the lady wanted to put it in a plastic bag. I said, no, she's not worried. Yes, no, it's not necessary. She said, no, everybody will see the plantain I'm carrying. I said, does it change it from being plantain?
At this point, we're going to take a short break, and we'll be back with more. Please stay with us.
Welcome back. You are still watching the morning show here on the Arise News channel, and Dr. Onoja, the Director of Technical Programs at the Nigerian Conservation Foundation, is still here with us. And before we went on a break, we were speaking about a load of issues around the flooding crisis that we have. But I wanted to bring you up on a point that sounds quite scary in its general terms to the public, myself included, which is that Lagos is below sea level. So I wanted to ask you what exactly that means for a city to be below sea level. Then, as Tundun mentioned, Nigeria is going to be, Lagos is one of the cities that is mentioned as being submerged by 2050. Yes. Is it? So what exactly do we have to start preparing for ahead of 2050 when we're not going to just be below sea level, but we're going to be submerged?
See, we have to take concrete steps. We have to take concrete steps to ensure that that doesn't happen. Because, as I said earlier, climate change is real. The sea level is rising. It means that any 5 to 10 meters rise in sea level will lead us to that place, and it's already happening in some areas. In some, as I mentioned earlier, the Lekki axis. Let me mention it so that people would know what's happening. The Lekki axis of Lagos is being gradually washed off. We've been tracking through satellite images and drone images. We've been tracking the flood in some communities around there, and when you go and you snap some houses using drone, the next time you visit there, 2-3 months down the line, those houses have been submerged. And so we found out that at the last time we checked, that was in September, we have 33 meters left in a community before the beachhead is washed off. And once the beachhead is washed off, the rest place is sandfield. And the Atlantic has a brutal force. If it's able to wash out the beachhead, which is natural, you can imagine what will happen to the sandfield area. The Lagos State government have put on groins that's brick walls, to break the current of the ocean. But it has to continue. We have to take deliberate actions to ensure that that continues to a point where there will be a natural merge between the rivers that flow into the Atlantic Ocean and the surface, so that there will be, that erosion will not be happening. But as it is now, it is happening. So we have to take concrete steps to do, at this point, we are already behind. We're already behind. So we have to put brown infrastructures, and the places that have not been affected yet, we ensure that we put natural barriers. And these are mangroves. Mangroves, with the way they are, you find that they have long roots that help to break the currents. These are natural barriers, but we go there and clear some of these things. Sometimes we want to sandfield, not knowing that water will always find its way. So we need to take deliberate actions to build up low areas, and to ensure that we plant areas, we reinforce areas that have mangroves so that they will be protected.
Now, you started by saying the Conservation Foundation is a non-governmental organization. And from what you've been saying, you do a lot of research. You've been monitoring the management of the environment by Nigerian authorities. What's the level of engagement between the Nigerian Conservation Foundation and government in Nigeria? That's one leg of it. The second leg of it is that we started this conversation with Lagdo Dam and the release of water from Lagdo Dam. Now, you recall that Nigeria has over 100 dams. Many of these dams are owned by the federal government, and they also release water periodically. And when they do so, the effect is the same, particularly in the affected states. Yeah. One line of argument is that, look, the federal government should hand over many of these dams to the state governments, so that the state governments can take responsibility for managing the process of release of water and all of that. Instead of state governors coming and saying, oh, it's because water was released from Isenyin Dam. Oh, it's because water was released from Oyon Dam, as if it's something that is outside completely of their own responsibility.
So I think that we don't look at that in isolation with what is the general policy in Nigeria. Because there are lots of things that we say, oh, this is federal government responsibility, state government responsibility. It just shows that there's no proper coordination. Because if there's proper coordination, at the end of the day, it's affecting Nigerians. Whether you're a state government or you're the federal government, it's affecting Nigerians at the end of the day. So I will call on the government to have more fluid communication and coordination for that to happen. But as well as NCF, yes, we do a lot of advocacy. We work with the government. We try to see where there are lapses so that we talk with the government. We engage the government, especially through the Federal Ministry of Environment, because that's our mainstay ministry that we communicate with the government through. And we work very closely with them to ensure that the environment angle of the nation is being properly taken care of.
Is it? Because, I mean, you talked a lot now about erosion, desertification, deforestation. All the cures seem to be one thing, plant more trees.
Yeah.
How effective is that been so far? And we also are signed up to Sustainable Development Goals. How are we performing in that regard?
I can say that we're not performing very well. And that's why we say we're working with the government to put them on their toes to ensure that they work. They do what they're supposed to. Because we go out there, we sign some of these conventions, and we come home, we refuse to domesticate them. Let me give you a classical example. We are a member of the Convention on illegal trade in wildlife, CITES. Nigeria was suspended. Currently, our rosewood don't go out. Now, we found out that there is a problem with enforcement. Now, not just about the enforcement, but even the law enforcement officers themselves don't even know that this law exists. And even if they do, they don't have the willpower to enforce it. So, good thing that it was reviewed and signed into law in 2016. Now, it's been more contemporary issues that have been taken on board. But the law enforcers themselves don't even know that this law exists, most of them. Because I can give an example. A sea turtle was caught by one of our colleagues at the beach, and the policeman was standing there urging her to pay off the fisher folk so that he will go, and then probably for him to get his own cut, instead of him to be the one arresting that person, because that's an endangered species that shouldn't be handled by someone who is not an expert. So, but because he's not aware of that, he's having that kind of issues.
So are we also having biodiversity challenges now in Nigeria?
Yeah, we do.
We're killing off our...
Yeah. We have serious trade in endangered species. And that is why, as NCF, as I said, we are working with the government to build the capacity. We've noticed that there's the capacity of law enforcement agents, even the prosecutors themselves, because when you enforce the law, you need the prosecutor to be able to understand the law to give proper penalty. So we are also working with the government in that regard, so that we will be able to. We are organizing a workshop to be able to do that. So we have these areas that we work with the government to ensure that.
I think this example of a sea turtle that you cited is interesting. But are you saying that Nigerians should not grab whales that are washed offshore? When it is free meat, you have seen pictures of people grabbing the whale. And carrying saws and
hacking at the
and hacking at it for barbecue and pepper soup.
Yes, actually, that's in a civilized world. Number one, we don't know why they are washed ashore. They may have been sickly. Mm-hmm. They may have had their own issues. But when we talk, we also talk with the human face of the current situation in the land. In real terms, you cannot tell a community where they have been devastated, where probably their livelihood has been taken, and then God brought this big whale to them, and you tell them not to go on. Free food. Yeah, on one hand, we try to discourage that, but on the other hand, we are looking at reality as well. But it eventually comes back to haunt us, because we live in a delicate balance with the world, with the earth, with nature. And we need to understand that balance. Because at the end of the day, humans, we are the least equipped to live on earth. Because our skins are so bare, we don't have claws, we don't have sharp teeth. But all other animals and other species, they can cope.
They have self-defense mechanisms.
But we don't have that. So we need to understand that balance, that nature is made for us. And we need to treat it well. If not, it will come back and bite us really hard.
Okay, so before we round up the discussion, let me bring you back to the drainage problem we were discussing. Now, you had mentioned floodplains earlier on and how people build on floodplains, and the word or the description itself should be able to tell you that this place is prone to flooding. And we have all of these problems around proper planning of a city like Lagos with over 20 million people. And the honest question is, where is the starting point? Because we have houses that are built on top of drainage systems. We have we have commercial buildings in places where they should not be, and there is just extremely poor planning of the city. So where is the starting point if we really want to fix our drainage problems?
You see, as with every solution, as every situation, we need drastic measures. If not, we'll come back years after years and be discussing this same thing. And that is what has brought us here. You break the law, you pay for it. You build on drainage is not supposed to be there, your house is demolished. Because at the end of the day, other law-abiding citizens are suffering it. You can see the situation, people build on, I'm not sure the drainage master plan of Lagos is still being maintained. We are suffering the same thing in our reserve. Everywhere has been built up, so my reserve is now like a trough. And all the waters, all the flood waters come into the reserve. And we're having diebacks of our trees, which is the major problem because the drainage master plan there has been tampered with. So if the law is allowed to take its course, then people will learn not to break it. So drastic measures has to be taken for those who have flouted it. Because if the early urban planners have planned that, okay, these are floodplains, these should be where drainage should be, then it should be. And anybody who built on the road...
The caveat to that is that many of those buildings blocking the drainages are owned by government people and very influential persons in society.
Yeah, that's where the problem is, and then we'll continue to suffer all of this. So we'll continue to come and talk and talk and talk. At the end of the day, it will still be the same.
But before we go, quickly, because we'll be rounding up in a few seconds, what's your assessment of Nigeria's action on climate change? I mean, at the Ministry of Environment, we have climate change desk, we have officers. Each time we get an opportunity to go to the United Nations General Assembly, even this last one, President Buhari was talking about our commitment to action on climate change. But as somebody who has been monitoring this, do you think we're really committed or we're just saying the right things?
I can say that to an extent, we are taking steps towards that. It may be baby steps, but we are taking steps towards that. There's more awareness on that. People are taking more climate actions to be able to ensure that that happens. And the good thing is that the younger population are joining in. And as soon as that population is really, really in sync with this, you will see a great change. And we are moving on that direction.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Joseph Onoja.
And we ended on a good note. Thank God for that.